Hi there, it's Donovan, and just believe me, okay? I've made this incredible invention. I call it the cheese roll. I mean, it's gonna be huge in video games. This! Nintendo as a hardware manufacturer is definitely more fascinating than Sony and Microsoft when it comes to their systems. Though starting off very standard and straight to the point, Nintendo started veering off into the unknown with their hardware designs and can make fans jump with joy or waste 30 minutes of their lives complaining on 4chan. They've always looked for innovative ways to reshape how we play games, and how those wacky game mechanics come to be sometimes start with the design of the system itself. I always love diving into how ideas evolved into its final form, so I'll be taking a look at Nintendo's prototype consoles spanning from the NES to the Nintendo Switch, and we'll be including their handhelds as well.
Oh yeah. Fuck you, PlayStation.
So all the way back in the 80s, Nintendo's home consoles had to start somewhere, right? The Famicom was their first true console that had interchangeable cartridges. And what was their early prototype? Holy shit, were they developing a game system or a bomb? When trying to bring the Famicom to the States, there was one problem. Never let bro cook again. The US was in the middle of the video game crash where terrible games just kept flooding the market, to the point where retailers just had enough. No one wanted video games anymore. They were expensive, fraudulent pieces of trash. Yar's revenge can kiss my ass. So Nintendo not only had to market the NES in such a way to get it to retailers, but they have to save the video game industry. They redesigned the Famicom just in time for the Consumer Electronics Show, where they revealed the Nintendo Advanced Video System. This prototype is fascinating. It featured a flat but honestly kinda sleek form factor with an early zapper, joystick, and a very funky looking controller with a strange D-pad, and it was wireless? That's crazy! And to make it seem even more professional and less toy-like, there was a big ass keyboard and even a cassette player. But alas, businessmen saw right through Nintendo's ploy, and this prototype went back to the drawing boards for a different approach to the American audience. This led to the inclusion of Rob, a decoy housing what really was an army of Nintendo ninjas to sell video games. Oh wait, this is literally a Trojan horse. The Super Famicom had a steady prototype phase. Its first iteration was definitely a lot simpler and smaller. There was a second iteration that starts to look familiar with its gray color schemes, and overall looking a lot beefier. Now when we talk about its American counterpart, I have no idea what they were smoking. The SNES looked like the NES top loader on steroids. What the hell am I looking at? Am I on acid? But we have to talk about one of the most legendary prototypes in video game history. That is one ugly baby. Nintendo was seeking to venture into CD-based games, starting with the SNES due to cartridges' limited storage capacity. So there began their loving relationship with Sony. Sony actually created the sound chip that's found in the SNES, so they had a little bit of a relationship going on. But then came the honeymoon phase, where Nintendo and Sony got really freaky in the offices. Sony squirted out the original PlayStation, a CD add-on to the SNES. Look at this honking machine. Look at the cartridge and the CD-ROM Super Disc. Look at this Sony branded SNES controller. Look at the logo. That's the PlayStation logo on a Nintendo system. Here's a photo of a supposed dev kit of the PlayStation. I don't exactly know what this is. I could be telling the biggest lie ever. This prototype is extremely captivating. A big scent of what if flies in the air. Unfortunately, Child Protective Services was knocking. Yeah, Nintendo and Sony had a very abusive marriage, and it ended up with a big nasty divorce. The Nintendo PlayStation soon faded into legend.
Fuck you, PlayStation.
I know I skipped over the Game Boy, but that's because I couldn't find much of its prototype phase other than it was called Dot Matrix Game internally. Oh, okay, what's after the Game Boy? Internally, the Virtual Boy was known as VR32. It was a fun little experiment headed by Gunpei Yokoi, the father of the Game Boy and the Game & Watch, until Nintendo started to panic when the N64 wasn't going to hit the holidays. Yeah, the baby's a little undercooked, but I think she could do well in high school. I couldn't find too much of the original prototypes of the stinky McFarface boy, but I did find this weird concept of what a 90s futuristic VR machine would look like, and I did find this photo of a purple Virtual Boy. I am really scraping the bottom of the barrel right now. Alright, the N64, oh wait, sorry, the Ultra 64 or Project Reality had a very similar prototype design to that of the final product, but the major difference was with its controller design. This one was black along with the console, gray buttons, and a very interesting design of the analog stick. It has a larger concave surface that honestly looks more comfortable. When it finally came time for another Game Boy, Nintendo set forth for Project Atlantis. This seems like a logical evolution of the brick design, but it has a very distinct curvature on the top and bottoms of the system. Maybe it was for comfort or whatever the designer was smoking that day. It was going to be a 32-bit system with a color display all the way back in 1995, right around the Virtual Boy and N64. Instead, Nintendo decided to milk whatever life the OG 89 Game Boy had. That boy was sucked dry. But then, 6 years later, Atlantis was finally put forth as the Game Boy Advance. Now for the GameCube or Project Dolphin, there are only a few subtle differences with the design of the system, the biggest one being a window for the disc tray to see it spin. But the big changes has to be again with its controller. This one also looks like it was sucked dry. This man needs some water. It looks similar, but very dehydrated. Different colors for the buttons. The B button is also the same bean shape as the rest, and interestingly, has no D-pad and replaces it with a big red start button. Later prototypes added the D-pad back, probably because of how universal it is on controllers, and that start button looks painful to press. Also, that analog stick looks fat AF, it needs to take a walk. Then it was further finalized and looks very similar to the finished product, just with different color buttons. And finally, we arrived to the final design, the B button finally being circular and the A button being more green. That was a hefty development for what Miyamoto considered to be the standard for the next 10 years. If you look back and squint a bit, I guess he was right. Best controller ASMR though. Now we move on to the DS. Oh wait, what's this Project Iris you speak of? This was revealed in the Nintendo Giga Leak, although not much is known. It was simply going to be a further continuation of the Game Boy Advance to further the evolution of 3D handheld graphics. There were indeed prototypes and emulators made, but nothing has been found, but it's super basic. It's literally a stripped down motherboard with a screen, a GVA slot, and SNES controller ports. Now why was this scrapped? This guy murdered him. Project Nitro, Nintendo's first departure from boring traditional designs into the world of modern art, aka throwing a bunch of garbage nonsense to the wall and hope people can find a deeper meaning to it. Banana wall. Well, you see, this symbolizes my ability to never get laid. They wanted to innovate with a dual screen technology similar to that of their multi-screen Game & Watches, as well as use a touchscreen. Their first prototypes would taste awful. This really does scream prototype. Later on, they refined this look of the Nitro, and oh my god, I never knew a piece of tech could be diagnosed as clinically obese. Those buttons, those absolutely thick bezels, are just not it, man. I would not date this guy. The thing is, I always forget the original DS looked like a tin trash can. This thing is a bulky question mark. When I think of DS, I think of the DS Lite design. That's just 10 times better than whatever this is. Now, parents, ever look at your child and say, I give up? That was the Nintendo Wii. The GameCube was just not doing it, so it was inevitably time to put the child up for adoption. So, along with the DS, Nintendo embarked for the blue ocean to look for new technologies to captivate people who've never even played a video game. They wanted to invest in motion-controlled games. They wanted a revolution. While the console itself was pretty finalized early on, using the guts of the GameCube, but just souped up a bit more, most of the design process went into, again, the controller itself. Numerous prototypes were made, like this TV remote looking controller, I have no idea how to describe this, and one looking a bit similar to the GameCube. But the wackiest one of all has to be Cheddar Cheese. Alright guys, hear me out. Zelda. Hey son, how did it go? I never wanted to be part of the stupid company anyways. It was circular, had 3 buttons, and most important feature of all, big fucking star. This will be the standard in the next 40 years, I'm telling ya. Yeah, some absolutely stoned engineer made this design and was somehow surprised that games couldn't be developed with it. I wonder what happened. In the next Zelda game, there will be a dedicated action for the star button. I'm telling you right now, it'll be a hit. You guys seem to not believe me, but just you wait till you get your sweaty ass hands on this. This will change gaming. Evolving on the rod design came a remote looking very similar to its final counterpart. This is a shrunken version of its final form with GBA SP buttons and a GameCube cord. This was all very rudimentary, but it worked. It had motion capabilities, even though the span of it was like 6 inches, but it worked. That's what she said in bed last night, and I'm very proud. There was also the Nunchuck, a way to get players even more buttons and sticks because of the Wii Remote's simplistic design. This further evolved into a more detailed shell with a rectangular power button, a different looking port for Wii accessories, and there were upper and lowercase A and B buttons. This all finally converted into its true form, now with 1 and 2 instead of lowercase letters, and a speaker to freak little kids out. Later on, Nintendo wanted to further the lifespan and capabilities of the DS, so they went out to create the DSi. What's intriguing here is not only the DS logo being on the cover, but the 2 cartridge slots. Apparently that was a highly requested feature, but in order to keep costs down, it was scrapped. Now let's talk about the 3DS. Nintendo always dabbled into 3D technology, but never went all the way, because the last time they did it, they squirted out the Virtual Boy. And it gets really embarrassing when you send too many kids up for adoption. But this was it. This was the time to ruin children's eyesight. One prototype was experimenting with swappable buttons for some reason, and another was a very simple DSi design but with a larger top screen, and it surprisingly doesn't have any circle pads. Here's another motherboard prototype with bare bones components. And that's kinda it. The only thing that changed after that was the circle pads not being in color. The 3DS XL had a prototype transparent design, but nothing else really. Okay, alright, it's time to talk about the Wii U again. Fuck this piece of shit!
I'm here to make another apology.
Remember the notification light that would appear on the Wii? Well, Nintendo created the GamePad so it'd be easier to access and gain context to view notifications, and so that was the basis of the Wii U's concept. Seeing games in a new view. They made this prototype using the Wii Zapper and attached a display at the top demonstrating its new way to view gameplay. Now for the gamepad itself, Nintendo crudely attached 2 Wii remotes to the side of a tablet in order to get a handheld-like feel. This evolved into a more refined prototype, which had a few more buttons in different places, added a camera, and, most eye-catching, are the same circle pads used for the 3DS substituted instead of analog sticks. This would later be refined to have analog sticks as well as NFC and TV remote functionality. Other than that, the console itself barely went through any changes. Okay, no more Wii U, I'm done! Nintendo once again wanted to refresh the 3DS a bit more due to its increased competition and demand. So, in comes the new Nintendo... Another lost Nintendo system? Alright, let's get into it. Project Indy was revealed within the Nintendo GigaLeak and was described through a treasure trove of legal documents as a handheld with capabilities in between the 3DS and Wii U. It would have carried a lot of traits from the 3DS, but there was also apparently Bluetooth, 480p screens, and a GPS, so the ninjas can track your ass down. But by far the most riveting features of Project Indy was its use of Miracast, which is screen mirroring to TVs and displays. This is shocking information. A handheld device being able to connect to a TV? Where have I heard that before? It seems that Indy was the original concepts for the new 3DS, but then started to morph into something a little different when documents detailed experiments with not just 2 screens, but 1 single screen, which wouldn't make it a DS. There were a lot of technical documents laid out for Indy prototypes, but none have been found. Now, what happened to this pseudo new 3DS / next gen handheld? That mofo killed it. A bit of the Indy does still exist, however, because of the Switch's anti-piracy chip. It was originally developed for Indy. Project Indy was originally conceived as a straightforward 3DS upgrade, but gradually morphed into a single screen concept that could wirelessly connect to a TV, but was essentially scrapped for a whole new project. That project would be Nintendo NX. After the Wii U was, I'm done talking about this! So Nintendo was ready to move on and innovate in a new sector of gaming. Their handheld and home console developers have always been divided, so bringing them together would help create a more unified team. With this merger, Nintendo too wanted to merge their handhelds and consoles into one device. And that magical machine would be the Nintendo NX. Multiple designs were constructed for the controllers and system. Here's a prototype Pro controller with a smoothened body and a solid faceplate instead of a translucent one of the final design. And originally, the Joy-Con grip would have been in a V shape before being switched to a more straight vertical design. And with Nintendo experimenting with controller and system designs, out came one of their prototypes for the NX with a full screen facade featuring only 2 what are supposedly circle pads. Eventually, they scrapped this philosophy and instead kept trudging forth with the Joy-Con idea, and it laid the path for the Nintendo Switch and its future successor. Nintendo has always strived for weird and wacky designs in their hardware, and in some cases can lead to the betterment and evolution of video games. It can lead to innovations that we never even knew we needed, and sometimes that could be for the better or just for the shits and giggles. But that's what makes Nintendo so special. And let's be real here. I see you laughing your asses off behind that screen. Like, this is the future, bitch!